Hello people of YouTube, my name is Brad. This is my channel, I'm an Orange, and welcome to the review video for the ICONX Yamato build. This rather large ICONX model, or at least long. This is a pretty big ICONX model with a lot of detail. And this is my second ICONX Battleship model. I did the Missouri some time back. It was a very detailed, time-consuming but very rewarding build. I expected the same out of this model, and I absolutely was not disappointed. And while this model, I really don't know time frame wise, I think this one took a little longer than the Missouri. But you know, when I built this model, I kind of slowed down. I kind of purposefully put myself in a mind frame that this model is going to take a while. There's absolutely no point in rushing. I did have a lot of other things going on in my life. I've got a move going on, as you can see behind me. I apologize for this very plain wall. All of my models have been taken down and boxed up because I'm on the very verge of moving. And with that, everything else going on, and knowing this is a large, detailed model, knowing what I remember from the Missouri, I just kind of mentally prepared myself that when I sat down to work on this model, I took my time. Maybe I could have built this model a little bit quicker, but I didn't. Was in no rush. And I ended up splitting it into the video, the build video, if you've not seen already, into 4 different parts. And I focused on somewhat logical sections. The superstructure was its own video. And then you work on the front weather deck, and that took quite a while, so that was its own video. And then it's the rear or aft weathered deck, and that was its own video. And then the 4th video is putting all the big pieces together, wrapping the hull around it, and finishing it up, which didn't take as long as I expected. But all in all, it was about an 8-hour build, 8.5-hour build, which is sizable for an ICONX model, for any Middle Earth model. But a lot of it's because there's just so much detail to it, and I took my time with that detail. This model has a lot more, or seemingly a lot more, little guns than the Missouri did, and that just takes time. I will say the superstructure on the Yamato was a lot easier, in my opinion, than the superstructure on the Missouri. The Missouri, I remember a few parts of the superstructure just being downright annoying and difficult to put together. And with this one, I didn't find it to be overly challenging. There was a couple of tricky parts that I had to work at with the Missouri that I didn't have with the Yamato. However, that being said, there are some structures in here, parts 4 and parts 9, which I think part 9 has these flags on the back. They have some very thin structures, railings that fold up, and you have to do your best to shape them into a curve. And I used some long nose pliers to do that, and for the most part it went okay, but it's so tiny and so delicate and just really difficult to get the shape just right. And I believe it was part 4 where I tried to shape it from underneath, but part of it is rounded and you can see the edge, but part of it is squared off and you can't see, and it's difficult to flip it over with the pliers in the way to see what line you should be following. And that was a bit of a challenge, and it's very easy to get it slightly off and then it doesn't look quite right. And there are 4 tiny little pieces in here. I'm not sure if there's some sort of radar equipment. There's 2 on one side and 2 on the other. They are part 11, and those things are tiny, and you fold them over, and those little side pieces that fold and shape in, and it seems like a real simple thing, but not a single one of them wanted to fold over evenly no matter what I tried to do. The last one almost did, and there was one side piece that I left open so I could shape it better before I folded that side piece in, but none of them really wanted to cooperate. So do the best you can. For me, there was some afterwards kind of trying to shape it back to the right shape. Not as good as I'd like it, but with everything else on there, they really don't stand out. Any imperfections don't stand out. They're kind of buried in all the detail. Part 31, and I'm trying to remember exactly which part it was. I think it's front section right here. The tabs come into sides that are angled, and it's difficult to get those tabs to go into an angled slot. So one of the tabs I bent it in, and then the end of it I kind of hooked a little bit so that it would hook into that side tab. You hook the straight one in, put the straight piece in, rotate the part around so the hook piece goes in, and I was able to get it connected that way. And I've used that trick with other similar slanted slots where there's really nothing you can do about that slant. You have to attach it the way it is, and that worked out pretty good. In parts 38 and 39, I've got a note on the number, and I can't remember exactly which two of the parts. It's part of the superstructure, part of the, I think, this main tower here, that when I was putting it together, maybe it was a little bit farther down. Can't remember exactly which part it is to point it out, but I'll show you some video from the build. When I was putting those two parts together, I wasn't sure which way to orient things, and I missed a very obvious clue that there's a part that I was looking for some detail on the back that they didn't show, and I guessed wrong because I didn't see the detail. But there's a fairly obvious part where you should have a section kind of lower down than what it is the way I put it together upside down. So I had to come back and pull that off and flip it and put it together the right way, and that was a little bit challenging. Really, I should say challenging. That was my own fault. That wasn't challenging at all. It was an oversight of mine, so that was my own fault. So always try to double check your work before you commit to anything. I say that all the time, and I still make the mistake of not doing it. But basically there's a couple of strips that stick out, and I had flipped it, put it together upside down, so the strips were kind of in the middle of the whole assembly section, where those two strips need to be on the bottom side so they line up with the next part that they connect and go under another piece, and that was the mistake that I made. There are some guns here and there, and I can't remember which ones they are, where the gun goes inside of circular areas, so you can't really see how the tabs are lining up with their slots when you're trying to put them together. And that was a bit of fun and get trial and error and guessing and trying to get the tabs in there. It can be done. I think it's these ones kind of part of the upper superstructure area where they go into like a hole where the tabs are inside that hole and you can't see them. So that certainly added a bit of challenge, but it is possible. Just keep trying, trial and error, try to get those tabs lined up straight. If the straight isn't doing it, maybe dip them in a little bit, see if that lines up, and keep trying until you figure it out. Eventually you'll get it, but be careful. When I moved on to building the weather deck, you start off by putting these big guns together. The big guns are really cool, but I find myself very disappointed in how they've decided to attach these. In the Missouri, I can't remember precisely, but there was at least two tabs on opposite sides. You basically got these gun barrels, which are model parts. You don't have to shape those. Those come in a Ziploc bag, which is really nice. I'd hate to have to shape that tiny little circle and do it 3, 6, 9 times and get it right each time. But how they attach them is there's a box or square shaped, cube shaped part with a hole in it. You fold the sides in, slide the barrel through the hole, and then that part attaches to the front of the main gun assembly. And in previous builds, usually there's 2 to 4 tabs, but at least 2 tabs on opposite sides of that box area. For whatever reason, in this model, there's 2 tabs, but instead of being on opposite sides of the 4 flaps, they're on flaps that are side by side, corner to corner. And to me, that just doesn't make a very good, sturdy connection, and it's part of why, if you notice, these gun barrels are not all, some of them are sagging and some of them are pretty straight, and they're just not all wanting to face the same way. And if I tilt it, they kind of shake out because they're just not being held as securely as they would have been had there been tabs on opposite sides. And I'm very disappointed they did that. I can see why they wouldn't have had the tabs on the sides, like horizontal sides, because there's so little space, but maybe one top, one bottom would have worked out and been a better connection to hold things in place. Maybe not leave as much room inside, I'm not sure. But definitely having the tabs kind of on the same corner, it's just not as secure as I'd like it, and it's causing them to just not wanting to hold in the same place, and it also made it difficult getting them nice and tight, and it makes this one front gun is just driving me nuts. The only thing I could do about it at this point would be to try and, well, at this point there's not much I could do about it, but I could have tried some glue before I got farther into the build, and I just don't really like stopping to do that. So that is my one big complaint about this model. It's not impossible. This one turned out okay, this one did not, and this one's kind of so-so. But yeah, that's one thing I wish they would have done a little bit differently. And speaking of the big guns, these big guns attach to the next piece by 2 little tabs on either side, and those tabs are on flaps that fold down, and I thought about trying to fold the tabs in, but I didn't. I twisted them, and even twisting them, if you were to take and push on the sides of the top of these, they would kind of lean over because there's just not much structural integrity there, because they're on tabs on pieces that are opposite side that the pieces themselves bend. That's a little disappointing too. I wish they would have maybe added a third tab in there to help hold things a little more structurally sound. Not a big deal, there's not a lot of weight on there, but when it comes to assembly, be very careful. Don't try to fold those tabs holding these big monster guns to the plate. Don't try to fold them over. I wouldn't recommend it, because you're running the risk of warping the entire part. Do that a couple of times and it's going to break, and you're going to be very upset about that. Then on the flip side, you've got this next size down gun with the 3 different barrels on it, and when you're putting the base together on that, there's a couple of tabs I think they recommend twisting, but honestly, in my opinion, it'd be better if you folded those tabs over before you got to putting the actual gun body on the rounded turret part. You know, that ran through my mind as I was twisting them, maybe I should fold them instead, and turns out the twisted tabs are more likely to get in the way of the next part coming on than if you just fold them over and then they're out of the way. And at some point during this front weather deck build, you get to these guns that are mostly on the side here, and they're kind of small, they're kind of small to medium sized rounded guns. It is part 83, excuse me, backing up, part 58. These guns mostly along the side. You put some of them together when you're doing the forward weather deck. You put more of them together when you're doing the rear weather deck. And those particular parts, the way the instructions, the way the top of them is, the instructions just kind of have you fold the top down flat. And it mostly looks like you're supposed to leave it that way in the instructions. But after you've shaped them and you notice on the top there's some indented lines, like they're intended to be folded more, and along the rounded part that curves around, it looks like, if you look at it from a side profile, there's kind of a, not a completely 90 degree, but kind of a almost 90 degree dip, and then it goes back out straight. When I looked on a 360 view for this model, it looks like they had shaped the top of those side guns, part 58, so that that dip was in there, but in the instructions, it's almost like the first time you see the instructions, there's like a very vague, unclearly put indication that maybe that's what you should do. And then later on, when you see the part revisited, they're not showing you how to shape it, they're just showing you it's there, and it's shown with a flat top. So I've actually looked on the Metal Earth subreddit and looked at the way other people built it, and some people have built it so the top is flat, and some have built it more like what's shown in the 360 view. I decided to go with the 360 view because if you look at an actual picture of this ship, those guns do have that kind of angled top to it, so I tried to stay true to that. When I first did them, I just left them flat, but it started to bug me, and by the end of part 2, when I was doing the front weather deck, the very end of it, I went back and reshaped the tops of the guns that I had put on. When I did part 3, I showed in more detail how I made that shape of the top and did all of those guns that way intentionally. And that's one of the things I wanted to mention here. I mean, it's your model, do it how you like. Either way, it's going to look okay. I personally kind of like the idea of having that kind of angled dip in the front, and it's a little more, seems to be a little more true to how the actual ship was built, and that's the reason I did it the way I did it. Then moving on to part 3, when you started doing the rear weather deck, there's this piece in here that's kind of sunk in. Part 75 and 76, the way that they come together, really tight squeeze. They almost didn't want to connect together. It was a little bit of a fight to do it, but eventually it did go together. If you're having if it's being seemingly overly tight to you, I have the same issue. Just be careful and move forward. It will eventually fit. You can coax it in there and keep going on with the build. Once the back weather deck is together and you've added the guns, you put the front and back weather deck forward and aft together into one piece. You add on the superstructure, and then you've got these 6 guns, 3 on each side, that are probably the third biggest guns on here. Those go on, and those are built sometime during the part 3 video, or was it part 2? Maybe it was the beginning of the part 3. Those are built in there, and I think I added them on in part 4. The way I split it up was a little odd there, but trying to do as logical as I could. Those are another example of guns that come into kind of a cavity area, and there's a tab in the back and a tab in the front. I made sure to put that back tab in first, because that way I still had some room to access the front tab with some tools to push or pull to get those tabs to line up. And that took a little bit of time. Again, so many things in this model, you just had to take the extra time to do the detail and get it right and be patient with it to get it to look as wonderful as it has the potential to be. Once you've added those guns on, then it's time to start doing the outer hull. The outer hull doesn't have a lot of parts. There's this oddly shaped piece here, and you have to kind of bend this part. First time I did it, I tried to put the initial curve in there. It has a bit of a curve to it. But the second time I did it, I just kind of folded it almost straight out, put the part in, and then use the edge of that part to make that curve. I find that oftentimes when you're trying to shape something to another part, put that part against it and use it as a guide to how to shape it. And that works so much better than trying to shape it before I put it on there, because it isn't a big flowing curve. It's kind of a quick curve and then up. And I got it wrong the first time. You add the propellers on the side, and then there's a anchor on the front. I only have one of them. The other side, when I went to clip it off, flicked away and disappeared. No idea where it's at. I'll probably find it. Maybe I'll find it when I go to sweep, when in about a week, when I finally move out of this house. But I just continued on without it. Then you add the sides on. You add one side, then you add the other. You know, I used the trick where I twisted the first couple of tabs to get things on, and once I started getting more of the tabs on, actually once I got the hole on, I went back and untwisted the 2 or 3 middle tabs that I lightly twisted, untwisted them, folded them over clean. The most difficult part for any ship that I've built so far, the one part that I really dread, is trying to connect the front and back halves where the holes meet. And this one was not too bad, and perhaps I can attribute part of that to having had multiple experiences with different models, and I've just gotten a better idea how to do it. Maybe this one is constructed better, but the back half, a little bit of trouble getting the 2 tabs quite lined up, but after a small struggle they popped into place, and there you go, easy peasy. The front, there's just the 1 tab up here that has to go into a slot, and I found the best thing to do was to basically right here in the midsection where the silver and the red meet, pinch that flat. Let's go ahead and pinch at that, and maybe even the whole bottom flat, and it'll angle that top in so that the tabs will go into their spots better and the seam will line up better. Once you've got it connected and you fold over that second tab to hold the middle, then you can fan the bottom part out a little, because the last thing you do is add the 2 sections at the bottom with the little fin and 2 more propellers. And I really didn't spend too much time shaping the propellers until after everything was together. Then I went back when I was putting on the hull. Certainly different pieces of the guns and the thin pieces got bumped and hit with my hands as I was struggling to get things together. So once I was done putting the model together, I literally sat it right down, went and took a break, started working on some of the video, did some other things, came back a couple hours later, well, after, you know, moving a few things, whatever, sat down with some kind of reset patience and went around, tried to straighten out all the guns and all the parts that I had incidentally bent, and also untwisted and folded over any tabs that I had missed. Then shaped the fins as I needed to, and made it look as nice as I could. Did the best I could with the flags. I'm not happy with how they turned out. Completely happy, but that part is so thin that it's just only going to cooperate so much. You can struggle to try and get one side done and nice and neat, and it's going to warp the other side. And I'm not saying it's impossible, but I did the best I could with that. And after all of those tips and tricks, you end up with this gorgeous model. I'd absolutely love to sit down and compare this with the Missouri right now. Unfortunately, the Missouri is packed away because it is moving time. So maybe down the road, once things are unpacked, I will do kind of a comparison on social media. But until that day, that is that for this model. This is definitely going down as one of my favorite ICONX models. This and the Missouri are just such wonderful and beautiful models. I have a soft spot, I guess, for ships, mostly spaceships, but naval ships are really cool as well. So this was a very fun build for me. even though it took forever and I was very interrupted during the build with everything else going on in life and the moving, I still very much enjoyed it, and I look forward to sitting down and putting a little bit more of it together, and the end result, absolutely stunning. Thank you, Metal Earth, for bringing this model, which I believe was originally a P-School model, to Metal Earth in the US where I could more easily access it. Thank you very much. And I love the little bit of red, and it's not quite, there's some gold, obviously some gold, there's obviously some red, some silver. While a lot of it looks like it's silver, it actually has kind of a very light grayish tint to most of the parts. So if you were looking at a lot of these small parts, flip them over the other side's actually more silver. There is color on most of this model, and it's so subtle you can't really tell it unless you look at the back side. So really cool, really well done, very beautiful. Metal Earth ICONX, wonderfully done. And I will leave it at that. I have jabbered on quite enough. As always, thank you for watching. Do stay tuned. There are more builds coming, but there might be a little bit of a pause as I really turn my attention in the next few days to trying to get stuff that I've spent days packing out of this house into the new house, and there's going to be a setup period. I foresee what's likely to happen is it'll be a while before I'm building in my house again, maybe a few weeks, maybe a few days, I can't say. My next few builds might actually take place at my local library. They have a makerspace, so I may, once I find time, go up there and sit and build. It's gonna slow the process down. I don't plan on stopping. I had made a news video previously about how there's gonna be some slowdown. It's not to say it's gonna stop. It's just gonna be interrupted for a short period, as short as possible with everything I can do. Anyways, I'll make an update video about that here very soon. As always, thank you for watching, and keep on keeping on.